You're listening to Building the Broncos with Nick Kendell and Carl Dumler, Broncos country's leading draft and scouting analysts. Head on over to milehighhuddle.com to sound off on all things Broncos.
Hello there, Broncos country, and it is once again time for another episode of Building the Broncos. I'm your host, Carl Dumler, and joining me today, as always, my good friend and co-host, Mr. Nick Kendell. Nick, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, doing pretty well. Can't complain. It is, let me see, I don't even know what day it is. Thursday today? Mm-hmm. And we got a game coming up at 7 o'clock that I'll probably have on in the background for the sake of the Denver Broncos, the Bengals and the Steelers, and cheering for the Denver Broncos. You probably want the Steelers to lose and the Browns to win. Now that does hurt the Broncos' strength of schedule because the Broncos play the Browns and not the Steelers, but you're probably more likely that the Browns are going to be in competition for the Broncos pick, and also the Broncos have the Steelers' third-round pick. So there's a little bit of rooting cause for you guys listening to this Saturday morning after this game's already happened. So I'm really glad I could give you that information. But other than that, doing pretty well. I need to get this in, edited and off to Chad, and then do some cleaning. The apartment is kind of a ground zero right now, so to speak. It's a little bit chaotic. Kind of happens when people are busy. And we are entertaining a couple guests this weekend for the Iowa-Minnesota game, so need to get to the apartment cleaning going on. So I used my negotiating skills and negotiated my way to some student tickets. And I'm not a student anymore, but I still have that student ID. So don't find me University of Iowa.
I'm going to be tagging them in this podcast.
Also, you know what? I just got to say it's a benefit to everybody else out there, because I am that person at the stadium that is, I don't try to get, too drunk. Obviously, I don't recommend that. Be responsible adults, folks. But in the student section, they don't give you weird looks when you yell and scream like a maniac when your team's on the defense. When you're kind of sitting around some 70-year-olds and your team is on defense and you're screaming your lungs out and they're sitting down, they kind of don't appreciate you so much. So I feel like I'm still young enough where the student vibe, where it's kind of loud and crazy, fits a little bit more with me being the crazy emotional person. See, once the game is going on, I'm a psychopath. Logic and reason doesn't matter. And then once the game is over, I can kind of separate myself from that. But during the game, complete lunatic.
I don't know. Last time I sat in the student section, I got punched.
Were you an opposing fan?
Yes.
Well,
I honestly, I don't really have a college team.
Yeah, you do.
I have a rooting interest for Iowa. I will say you're wearing me down more and more every year.
That's how they get people to live in Iowa. Eventually, you just give in.
But no, I was. It was a K-State game because I was at school in Manhattan, and they're playing Nebraska. I'm not a big Nebraska fan. For those of you that are a Nebraska fan, sorry. But I just wanted to cheer against them. And the girl next to me was very drunk, got very mad when I cheered for a touchdown and slugged me across the face and then ran off. So
what team was this?
Nebraska versus K-State.
That does sound like a Nebraska fan. Actually, that doesn't sound like a Nebraska fan. Typically, I like to give them a hard time, but that's not their thing. Must have been an isolated incident.
Well, that was a K-State fan that punched me.
Oh, okay. Well,
so I was wearing red because I went with a Nebraska fan that was a student at K-State. And it just did not go well. She didn't hit me hard, and I wasn't ever – I was just like, what was that about? It was nothing. But I just always love to tell that story because I'm like, yeah, that's my college football experience. I had another K-State game, actually, that I got into a wrestling match in the stands with another person.
Was it Dalton Reisner?
No.
That'd have been a much better story.
Well, yeah, he would have had me above his head. I actually did get into a wrestling match with their starting center one time when I was in college. And he did lift me above his head and start spinning me around like in the cartoons. So I know what it feels like to be a rag doll that's just being tossed around.
Well, now I have a goal for what I need to do at Iowa City before I end up leaving here with Tristan Wirfs. Yep. You could probably do that to me, but with one finger.
Man, you would be a legend if that happened.
I just want to have a dirty dancing scene with him. Let's be completely honest. Okay, we probably should get on track.
Yes. Don't want to make Natalie too jealous here,
No.
but no, I want to make sure because we're going to be tweeting probably about even tonight's game. I mean, yes, you'll be listening to this later on, but it does have a lot of, like you said, Bronco ramifications, and obviously lots going on with the Broncos with Drew Lock. We might talk a little bit about that here, but I want to make sure that you can find us on Twitter. You can find me at Carl Dumler MHH, and of course Nick at Nick Kendell MHH. And you can follow the podcast Twitter account at BTB Football Pod. And make sure you subscribe to our show and leave us a rating as we value your input. You can find the show on iTunes, Stitcher, and even that of YouTube. Also, make sure you head on over to milehighhuddle.com, a new affiliate of the Maven Coalition and Sports Illustrated. And know that this podcast is powered by Overtime Media.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
All right, Nick. Well, the Broncos are finally off their bye week, so we can actually talk regular football again, not just the awards, which I actually enjoyed doing those. Those were a lot of fun, just to kind of look at this team and see where they're at. I mean, it's been a disappointing season, but there's still a lot of promise that's been shown. But Minnesota Vikings, Sunday, noon. And here's the team. The Broncos are 10.5 point underdogs. Did that surprise you?
You know what? It does not. The Vikings are a really good team, and the Broncos historically are absolutely trash in that playing on the road at that noon kickoff time. So it does not shock me that much. I think that's probably right about where I would set it. I'd probably would have had it about 8.5, but 10. Meh, I'm not going to freak out about it.
Yeah, the Vikings have actually been one of the hottest teams in football lately.
Yeah, it turns out Kirk Cousins, when you compliment your quarterback to the scheme and give him an offensive line and some weapons, he's competent enough to do something. So pair that with a good coach, a good defense, and you're going to win some games. Just like everybody in the NFC North, they have to live underneath the massive shadow that is created by Aaron Rodgers and that Packers team, but this is a really good Vikings team. I honestly want to say this is probably one of the top 3 most talented teams they've played this year. And going on the road, I mean, Minnesota fans are ravenous, so it's 10.5 feels about right. I got no qualms with it.
Yeah, I saw a stat in 5 of their last 6 games that they've actually won. The average difference in point differential has been 12.4. So, I mean, they're not just winning their games. They're actually blowing out a lot of teams. So just something to keep in mind with that spread of why it would be there, why Vegas would favor, obviously, the Vikings by so much, and even have the betting, a lot of it going towards the Vikings. But just to kind of give you an idea of where they're at, because like I said, they're one of the top talented teams the Broncos are going to play this year, and they're very underrated because they do get overshadowed by a few other teams there in the NFC. But this is really one of the most balanced teams in football. They are 9th in points on offense, scoring 26.2 points, 5th in scoring defense at 18.2. So 2 top 10 units there. And when you can have that, their one weakness is their special teams, but we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a little bit. But no, they've been a very, very strong team. Offensively, they are consistent in keeping drives alive. I mean, it helps when you have a guy like Dalvin Cook and Stephon Diggs. And I mean, they just have some pretty good weapons there to work with, but they're 9th in third down percentage at 44%, 3rd in rushing yards per game, 3rd in rushing touchdowns, 17th in passing yards. So, I mean, they're kind of built like the Broncos. I mean, they are kind of led by Gary Kubiak. So, of course, he's going to have a more rushing centric offense. But even there, like you said, Kirk Cousins has been a very, very strong quarterback. He is 2nd in the league in passer rating, behind only the guy that right now is the front runner for the MVP in Russell Wilson. So just some things there looking at the offense. I mean, I know a lot of people focus on the defense because they have a lot of big names there too. And I know Dalvin Cook has kind of taken the NFL by storm, but Kirk Cousins has had a really, really good year this year. Defensively, right now, they are 13th in total yards, so they will give up some yards, but they do really crack down when they get to the red zone and keep teams obviously out of the end zone. 16th, though, in third down percentage, like I said, they will give up yards, but they won't give up a ton of points. And then the one, I guess I would say one big area that they really struggle with right now is the passing game. They are 18th in passing yards allowed and 18th in passer rating allowed. So some of that, I guess you could put towards that they are blowing out a lot of teams. And so then they're going to a little bit more of a prevent defense. But just kind of something to keep in mind there. And on top of that, they are good at turning the football over and not turning the football over a lot. They're 5th in turnover differential at +5 right now. So I guess, Nick, does any of what sticks out when you're looking at this?
Well, I think it's got to be the turnaround that this team has had with the offense. You know, everybody was making fun of Kirk Cousins a season ago. You know, the incompetence of this team. How could they pay him that contract? Well, they keep investing in the offensive line. You know, they took Pat Elflein. They've paid a guy like Riley Reif. They took Dalvin Cook in the 2nd round. And then this past season, Garrett Bradbury, Irv Smith. A lot of this is starting to, you know, hens coming home to roost. And the offense is complementing the defense very well. So I actually have some statistics here for you. Do you know what personnel offensively the Vikings prefer to use? So 11 personnel, 12 personnel, 21.
I'm guessing a lot of 21 personnel.
They're pretty even. A little bit of a trick question there. And overall, 22% 11 personnel, 29% 12 personnel. So for those out there, that is 1 running back and 2 tight ends, and then 25% 21 personnel. So they do like to use that fullback. Rushing the football, while the database loads, they're really effective rushing the football at 21 personnel, actually one of the more effective teams there. And they're also pretty good passing the football there, but 28% rushing it out of 21. So if the fullback's in there, they are probably going to run it. And then passing it, honestly, they love to pass out of 2 tight end sets. Really pretty good successful rate there. So want to watch out for them. I mean, Kyle Rudolph, not the best athlete anymore, but he's a big guy. You saw him with the 2 touchdown catches last week. And Irv Smith is playing pretty darn well for them. So this is a balanced attack. Kirk Cousins is one of the most efficient quarterbacks this season, especially EPA. You know, they're not asking him to drop back there and pass it a lot, but when he is passing it, it's pretty explosive. So kind of, you know, exactly what you want in this. They've almost taken what everybody loved so much about that Sean McVay offense last year. You know, they were really using Gurley, the threat of that run game, and then the play action and the explosive pass plays off of it. That's kind of more the Vikings this year. And I think that a big reason the Rams aren't doing it, but a big reason the Vikings are able to do it, is because their offensive line, along with the threat at that running game, has done enough to make the play action a big enough threat. You know, you have to respect the run game there. Otherwise, he's going to get 5+ yards every time. So really, I think the biggest thing for me is this defense isn't as good as it was, you know, 2 seasons ago when they lost in the NFC Championship game, especially in the secondary. But with how they can control the game offensively and hit the big plays when they need to, then, you know, that's really what it comes down to for me. However, really big caveat, it does sound like we're recording this Thursday night, so we won't know until later, but it does sound like Adam Thielen is not going to be playing.
And that's a huge boost for the Broncos.
Yes.
I mean, Stephon Diggs, he's still going to get his. He's a great receiver in this league, but I mean, that's a huge loss for the Vikings. I mean, they still have plenty of weapons to work with, and so I still think that they'll get plenty.
But do they in the passing game? I really do not respect their depth of the depth chart, at least at wide receiver.
Right. No, you're right. I mean, they do have Laquan Treadwell, but he's never lived up to the hype of what a lot of people thought he would be coming into the league.
Guys who can't separate, man. It's
I know.
A concern.
This is why I was like against Mike Williams and guys like that. I've never been a big fan of the guys that can make the tough catches. Like they have their red zone that they can be very beneficial, but I like a guy that's a little bit more all around. But no, I mean, I guess those 2 tight ends make up a little bit of a difference there. Like I said, I'm guessing they'll run a lot of 2 tight end sets here. Dalvin Cook is a receiving weapon in his own right. I mean, there's a reason that they're the number 1 screen pass team in the NFL this year.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, there's a lot of good going on there. And the other thing that really sticks out to me with the Vikings, they seem to be really only getting better as the season goes.
I mean, they're built for these slugfests and these cold weather games. And a lot of teams at this point, it's the beginning of the season. You're all healthy. It's nice weather out. We're getting to the home stretch here. A lot of these teams are banged up. And, everybody's on the injury report. The cold weather is out there. The Vikings are a physical team, both sides of the ball. And they will punch you repeatedly. And it's going to test your mental resolve. It's going to test your discipline. Just really how much you want it. If you're constantly, it's kind of like going up against Wisconsin, although Minnesota here is running more of a zone scheme. But bringing it back to college football, Wisconsin is a team that they're built for that cold weather. They're built for the nasty. And I know Minnesota plays inside, but still a cold weather conference. And they are built on out physicaling you, beating you with physicality. And they're doing it right now to pretty much every single team. So it's a concern. They have a talented offensive line. I think 3 first-round picks, Reef, Elfline, and Bradbury, who was a super talented center. Perfect, an absolute perfect center for this zone blocking scheme with his athleticism. It's pretty incredible. And do you know what Kirk Cousins' nickname for him is? Or you know what the Vikings' nickname for Garrett Bradbury is?
I do not.
It's Piss. You know why?
Why?
Same reason why Stink's name is Stink.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. He said it stinks down. Yeah.
Yep. He's like, man, I'm really just getting tired of playing under center and having to wipe off my hands every time because they're wet from urine. Oh my God. What? Okay. Anyway, really talented center. Yeah. And then you have the tight ends. I mean, it's a good offense. I don't respect the depth of their wide receivers. Especially without Thielen out there. They have a really good 1-2 punch, but Bissy Johnson, Laquan Treadwell, doesn't really do it that much for me. And also, I think Josh Klein might be missing this game as well, so maybe some issues there at right guard, but still, it's a really balanced team right now, and that's what it comes to. They're playing complementary football, as cliche as that sounds.
Right. No, you're right. And Bradbury, he's one that really sticks out to me that has absolutely improved as the season went on.
Yeah.
He looked like the worst center in football for about the first 4 games of the year.
I got to say, Kenny Clark has done that to a number of people this year.
That's true. That does make a big difference. But even like he struggled against Atlanta, Oakland, Chicago, all those teams really just handled him well.
Yeah.
And since then, though, he has looked like a very, very competent center in the NFL, looking like that first round grade is actually starting to meet those kind of expectations. And so, you could look at their overall grades this year and say, okay, that interior offensive line has really struggled. But like I said, that was really has to do with a lot of what happened early in the season. And so you got to make sure that you're living in the moment. I mean, you got to look at the full picture, but at the same time, kind of look at what are they doing lately more than anything else. So this is a very balanced team. And I think this is going to be, if the Broncos can win this game, I'll be downright impressed. I mean, this is, like you said, it's one of the toughest games. It's set up for the Broncos to fail.
I do think it'll be close. I think the Broncos defense will keep it close.
Yeah, I don't think it's as bad as a lot of people out there are making it out to be. Like I said, that 10.5 differential there, I think it'll be closer than that. I would actually take the Broncos if we're going to take points. But, I mean, it's just, again, this is a tough team that has a lot of playmakers all over the field, both offense and defense. I mean, there's just not a level that you can look at and say there's not at least a playmaker there. Yeah. And, I mean, we'll talk about a few weaknesses that I think the Broncos can exploit in this one. But at the same time, there's going to be you're going to have to do some projection of some Bronco players living it beyond what the expectations are for them. So I don't know. It'll be I'm excited for this game. I think it'll be, like you said, a decent one that I think the Broncos can stay with the Vikings and really prove to people, hey, this team's not as terrible as maybe the record shows. I think I presented this question to you and a few others earlier this week. And I know, like we said, Pro Football Focus doesn't always, the grades are always kind of weird. But do you know where they have the Broncos as an overall team ranked?
No, I did not.
9th. and they are the only team with a losing record in the top 17.
Well, that's it's not what you want.
Right.
Granted, that's kind of how it's been. Right.
And I do think, the old saying of, well, you are what your record says you are. I think that's a little, I don't think that's a quite great saying because, there's some teams that just statistically just win games that they probably shouldn't. I remember the Raiders when they had their one winning season a few years back, and everybody's going, "Oh, the Raiders have arrived." And I pointed out, well, do you realize how many games they won by one score? Like really, really close games that they had to make last second comebacks and just had some fluke things go their direction. The same with the Broncos in 2015. Let's be serious. That was a pretty fortunate season for the Broncos. And so, sometimes things just line up. Other times, kind of like this year, I had to I had to text my Chief fans and say pretty much, hey, I know how you feel.
Yeah.
And because, how many times have we had those weird losses this year that were just like, how did that just happen? Now, Chiefs, that one was downright just laughable. I don't even know how that happens. So yeah, it's been kind of a weird year, but this should be a fun one to watch, and kind of the direction I think the Broncos really want to go as a team is what the Vikings are right now.
Yeah, the Kubiak / Shanahan West Coast offense controlling it with a great defense. That's the mold. Now, is that explosive enough to keep up with the Chiefs? We'll see. You don't want to be the Vikings over the last decade in Aaron Rodgers' shadow. But it is good enough to compete against pretty much anybody and make some playoffs and some runs. So, we'll see. But anybody on this defense you want to highlight for the Vikings? Going over the stats here, but also going over the roster.
Well, one guy I want to kind of highlight more just because I want to ask you what's going on with him. Xavier Rhodes.
Yeah.
2 years ago or so, he was pretty much top 5 cornerback in the league consensus. Everybody is like, yeah, this guy is a great cornerback.
Roads closed.
And he just, I don't know what happened to his game. Where is he struggling? What do you think is really the driving force here? Because it's not like he's actually that old per se.
No.
He's only 29, so he shouldn't have this huge fall off in his game. Compared to, Chris Harris has hit 30 and his game's, it's fallen off some, but it's not like this dramatic fall off like we see with Xavier Rhodes.
Yeah, I could not tell you beyond pure speculation. He's always been a somewhat handsy player and a little bit stiff in the hips, but with his size and physicality, he's been able to get away with it. And I just feel like that has been less of the case so far. They've been calling him for those types of penalties and the like. So, I haven't done a deep dive on him, but he definitely has fallen off some. And that's a guy, if you have a chance for a one-on-one or you see an opening and Cortland Sutton's on him, toss it up, because I think you have more than a 50-50 chance that something good's going to happen, whether it be Sutton coming down with it or a penalty, because Rhodes, when he gets beat, he can get pretty handsy. That said, I do like some of this depth of the Vikings cornerbacks. I don't think, with Rhodes not playing great and Trey Waynes, I think, set to hit a free agency, those guys aren't great, but I do like their third and fourth one for being third and fourth corners, so to speak. Mike Hughes, first round pick from 2 years ago, tore his ACL very early in the season last year and been coming back, but he's got some really fun tools. And Mackenzie Alexander for a fourth cornerback, that's pretty good. Then, of course, you obviously have Harrison Smith, who is kind of his own era's Eric Weddle. Eric Weddle's still playing, but Harrison Smith kind of a gap, a generation later. So really on paper, the secondary, you think they'd be better than they are. I'm not sure if it's schematically or somebody really not stepping up, or maybe because they don't have a true interior pass rush presence. Samar Stephen, Jalen Holmes, Hercules Mataafa. You have some guys rotationally that can be pretty good there, but I don't really see anybody that I'm loving at that 3 technique spot, at least not at the Sheldon Richardson level that they had last season.
Right. I do definitely think that plays a huge role in what's going on with some of that, and quarterbacks having a pocket to step up in and knowing that it's going to be there.
Because their edges are great.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
They're two of the, I just did an article on stats. Daniel Hunter is number 1 in pressures, and so Everson Griffin is 3rd. Yeah. So they got 2 top 3 pass rushers in the league this year.
Yep.
And I mean, I think those are a little bit skewed. Just like I said, teams have been playing from behind, so they've had a lot of pass rushing opportunities. And so if you look at their percentages of actual getting pressure
rate.
Right. It's not tops in the league, but they're still great. I mean, I don't want to take anything away from what they're doing on the field by any means.
Yeah.
And there's, like I said, I think there's a lot that's going into play with what's going on with some of the things that are ailing a little bit of this defense. I mean, like I said, they're still a top 5 scoring defense. So we're nitpicking here a little bit that they're at least shutting teams down when it matters the most. I don't think they're getting some of the interceptions that they've gotten in the past.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that kind of skews some of the numbers. I mean, you got a guy that comes in and gets a couple interceptions. Well, yeah, his passer rating against him is going to look much better than what Xavier Rhodes, who doesn't have an interception this year. Trey Waynes, I think, only has 1. So, just little things like that to keep in mind.
And I got to say, the most underrated guy from a national perspective on this defense, Daniel Hunter, probably national perspective, he should be talked about as a top 5 edge rusher. He's absolutely dominant. I think he's only like 23 years old too. He came into the league at like 20. He might be up to 24, 25 now, but he came in as a baby and 3rd round pick, really toolsy, but raw. Man, what a great get there. But Eric Kendricks flying around with long hair. I believe he played at UCLA, early 2nd round pick. Might have been the second round pick that season, I think, after Landon Collins, but man, Eric Kendricks playing great football, hardly ever in the wrong spot. And while not the best athlete, he's so just always in the right spot. His feet and the way he's facing is always in the right spot. Became a pretty good coverage player too. So want to give a shout out to Eric Kendricks. He is one that I'm guessing is going to have a massive role on whether or not the Broncos can run this football and hit over the middle passes or not, because he's been one of the best linebackers in football this season.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people know about his run defense, but he's actually been pretty good in coverage as well this year. So that's something to keep in mind. But like you said, he's just amazing at being in the right spot. Hardly ever misses a tackle, and just, I mean, he makes plays around the line of scrimmage. I always remember like DJ Williams for the Broncos. He would rack up a lot of tackles, but they were usually like 5-6 yards down the field.
Yeah.
And I mean, I like DJ. It just, I don't think he was as good as sometimes the tackle numbers suggested. And so when I'm looking at linebackers that are especially run defense linebackers, are they making plays around the line of scrimmage to actually make it those 3rd and long situations? Eric Kendricks is that guy. And like I said, he beyond that, he's a pretty good all around linebacker for him right now. And so he's definitely a guy to keep an eye on. Like you said, he's very, very underrated. PFF actually has him as their highest rated defender this year at a 90.6 overall grade. And I think the tape lines up with that. He's just been very, very consistent week in, week out of being one of their top players.
Yeah. All right. Well, we should probably get a break in here, folks. We'll be right back. Do not go anywhere.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
Alrighty, and we are back on the Building the Broncos podcast. I am Nick Kendell along with Carl Dumler. Carl, it's time to play coach and talk a little bit of scheming things up here. I guess you have the Broncos offense versus the Vikings defense. I'll let you kick off.
All right. Well, like we already said, they're a pretty well-rounded defense, but that secondary has been struggling this year. And I mean, I think pretty much every team that's going to play the Broncos from here on out, whether it is Brandon Allen or Drew Lock or whoever's starting at quarterback, pretty much teams are going to dare the Broncos to throw the football. I mean, that should be a given that they're going to do that. It'd be stupid not to. If you're going to let Phillip Lindsay and Royce Freeman beat you, that's just on you. and so I'm guessing they're going to load up the box. They're going to make sure to really contain that run game. I'm not saying that you abandon the run game completely, but this is another game where Brandon Allen's going to have a lot of one-on-one opportunities to toss up the football. And he's also going to have to really trust his offensive line, which for the Broncos, that's been obviously a pretty big struggle this year, especially with these edge players and what they're going to be able to bring. But he is going to have to trust, especially those middle three, to really hold up their spot and be able to step up in that pocket and make some tosses with people all around him. And I don't know if he'll be able to handle it. I mean, that's going to be the big question is, can Brandon Allen do what he did last week and a little bit more? Because he's going to have to do a little bit more than what he did against the Browns. He's going to have to hit a lot more of the easier throws. He hit the big throws. He didn't always hit the easier throws. I mean, he even talked about that this week, that he's got to be more consistent, recognizing what a defense is giving him. And this is also a game, not only is he going to have to step up, but it's going to have to be where another wide receiver is going to have to step up. The Vikings are pretty good in coverage over the middle. I mean, their linebacking core, they have a lot of athleticism and safety, like you already talked about with Harrison Smith, one of the best safeties in the entire NFL and a very, very good guy in coverage. And so for the Broncos, they are going to have to lean on those outside wide receivers to really step up. And I trust Courtland Sutton to do it. Can another guy do it? Can you have Deshaun Hamilton Tim Patrick comes back this week. Yeah. I'm interested to see how many snaps they're willing to give Tim Patrick.
And I do want to toss out Deshaun Hamilton just entered the injury report with a knee injury, according to Mike Kliss about 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, I'm not sure. He was limited. I don't know how serious the knee injury, but it's just something definitely to monitor. Yeah. But no, if Tim Patrick can go, I think he'd be a great matchup against Trey Waynes because he has that size. And so he is a guy that you can toss it up and let him go make a play. Again, I don't know where he's at in his recovery, how many snaps he can get on the field, how well he fits, timing wise, all those kind of things. I mean, that's just going to be a question moving forward for him. But no, they're going to have another guy step up. And so now, if the Broncos do run the football, what do? I do think that you try to run it at the edges a little bit. Daniel Hunter, like you said, he is one of the best pass rushers edge rushers in the NFL, but his run defense is a little bit suspect. It's not that it's downright terrible, but it's not great either. And so if there's a guy that you're going to try to run at, I think that's where you're trying to take the football. You're going to have to do a little bit of misdirection because, again, they do have a lot of athleticism, but sometimes athleticism can really work against you if teams can really work some of that misdirection stuff. And so Deontay Spencer with a sweep play or a reverse or something like that, just to keep them on their toes of what might be coming. You're just trying to, what do the Broncos have to lose? Everybody expects them to lose anyway. So I know some people have gotten mad at Scangarello this year for maybe getting a little too cute at times, but they're going to have some big plays in this one. And so they're going to have to take a few chances. I do think Brandon Allen's going to have to throw into coverage and trust his receivers to come down with it. And like I said, sometimes the run games really work to get those edges, which could mean some negative plays every once in a while. But it's just kind of where things are at. And then, like I said, Brandon Allen, take what the defense gives you, but take a few chances here and there as well. If you see Courtland Sutton in one-on-one coverage, you throw it to him every time. That should be football 101, right? Best receiver on the team against a struggling secondary, especially struggling cornerbacks in coverage. Toss it up, let him see if he can make a big play. And like you already said, some of these guys get a little handsy, and whether he catches it or whether he gets a penalty, it's still a great play for the Broncos. And so I see the offense struggling in this one. Like I said, the Vikings are a very good run defense. And so when you take away the Broncos' strength and make them have to win with their weakness, that's a tall task to ask, but hey, crazier things have happened.
Yeah, no, you're correct. So I guess I get the Broncos defense versus the Vikings offense. You know what? I'm not going to take too much time on this, but the Broncos need to continue doing what they're doing. The Vikings offense has been pretty solid this season, but the Broncos, since the Leonard Fournette fiasco, their run defense has been pretty good, especially outside runs, which the Vikings have been better at with their outside zone as compared to their inside zone. So continue playing disciplined football. I think you have to do your best to neutralize Dalvin Cook and the run game and put the game on Kirk Cousins. He's made some big plays this year, but I feel like it's been way more complimentary football off that play action. And the play action is coming. So it's a little bit of, you got to stay disciplined and hit your keys, but only when you're sure it's a run. You can't bite too hard on that play action because otherwise Diggs can beat you. Thank God that Thielen isn't healthy. Otherwise that could change things there. That'd make it much harder. But with just Diggs, that's a little bit of a concern, but not as much as if Thielen was there too. So got to do your best to eliminate Dalvin Cook. He can't be the one to beat you. And if he is, and you did everything you could there, tip of the cap, they out-executed you and maybe out-talented you as well. But you really got to do what you can to eliminate that run game. And honestly, this is going to be a big game for Chris Harris Jr., in my opinion. He hasn't had the best season so far, and we really are starting to see the age start to become a factor. Odell Beckham Jr. had him a fair amount 2 weeks ago. I mean, let's be completely honest. And Diggs, he's not Odell Beckham, but he is a really good wide receiver. And without Thielen there, the pass game is going to come down to a lot of Diggs. So we're going to find out about that. And another thing that we're going to find out about is these safeties / linebackers against tight ends. Again, no Thielen. Where does that volume go to? Running backs and tight ends. And this is a team that looks to utilize it. I think that the Broncos, because of the scheme, because of how they designed the linebackers coverage roles, you're not going to see as much tight ends making absolute fools of the linebackers, but this is a game where it could be a little bit more of an issue, and there's more target share for the tight ends because of Thielen being out. So really, biggest thing, make Kirk Cousins beat you. And if he does, it happens. Sometimes they're going to out-execute you, but that run game, you can't let them run rampant on you. If they do, it's over.
Yeah, something to kind of keep in mind. They run, I think it's something around 40% of their runs go to the tackle or wider in run plays.
Yeah, they love the outside zone.
They love it. And why not? I mean, when you got a guy like Dalvin Cook, who I think he does the best job of anybody in the league of making guys take foolish angles.
Yeah.
You just don't expect that quickness. I mean, he's fast, but I think it's the quickness part that really gets guys, that he can just turn a corner and just boom, he's gone. And so, the edge guys, Von Miller, Malik Reed, those guys are going to have to be outstanding. The other big thing is just not missing tackles. Dalvin Cook makes people miss. They try to take him down with an arm tackle. Like I said, they take terrible angles. And the Broncos have been a pretty sound team tackling this year, but it's still, something that, this is one of those games that could get out of hand real quick if they don't tackle well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're correct. So big tackling, big staying disciplined in your run lanes. And you also got to watch that backside defender because Kirk Cousins, not a great athlete, but that boot game is strong. So got to look out for it. So game predictions. Broncos are 10.5-point underdogs in this one. The over-under is 40.5. What are you doing, Carl?
Well, I'm taking the under.
Yep, me too.
If I'm the Broncos, just a stat out there for any of you bettors, the Broncos have hit the under in 15 of their last 18 games. So, I mean, part of it's obviously they're not scoring, but it's also the defense has really held up so well of keeping teams from scoring. So, I think this will be a lower scoring game than some people are expecting. I mean, unless there's a couple crazy turnovers, this is going to be a halfway close one. And, like I already said, I would take the Broncos if you're given the points. And I feel like this could become like a 7-point game is kind of where I have it.
Okay. I'll take the under as well. I don't think that both teams will score over 20 points. So we'll see. Broncos games have gone under 15 lamp. There's good information there, Carl. Man. I don't trust Brandon Allen enough to take the over. That's what it comes down to. The Broncos had a lot of offense on 2 plays last week against the Browns at home. Vikings got a better defense. Broncos are on the road. I just don't see it. So how can you trust Brandon Allen? The Broncos won, but I would vehemently argue that it was much more the system and the talent around him than Brandon Allen making wow plays. I can maybe think of 1 or 2 throws where it's like, okay, that was good. A lot of it playmakers making plays, which, that's part of the game. You got to let your playmakers make plays. That's part of being quarterback. But I just, I think I think the people who are like, hey, Brandon Allen, we won. Let's see if this guy has something. They're going to get quiet real quick. I could be this would be crazy if I'm totally wrong on that, but you never know.
Yeah.
So the Broncos win if
they score a non-offensive touchdown.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I know that's asking a lot, but I do think they do have an explosive player in Deontay Spencer, and this is not a very good special teams team here in the Vikings. So there's going to be some opportunities there. And then the Vikings, while they haven't thrown a ton of interceptions, they have fumbled the football a lot. So there are going to be some opportunities for turnovers in this one. And maybe it's not that they have to scoop and score kind of thing, but at least the offense goes and scores a touchdown off a turnover or something. I just think they're going to have a couple big plays go their direction of the Vikings making mistakes to win this one.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think the Broncos win if they put up more than 20 points. I think if they are able to get more than 20 points, I think the defense is going to do enough to win. So, Broncos lose if
Dalvin Cook is held to 93 yards or less. And their 2 losses recently, that's the number. That was the average of the yards that he gained. In the wins, he had 153. So if they can, like you already said, if you can contain Dalvin Cook, put the ball in Kirk Cousins' hands, you stand a chance. Yeah. But if Dalvin Cook gets loose, and he's very good about those big play numbers, I think they were second in explosive plays in passing and first in explosive plays in the run game.
Yeah, they are creating a lot of explosive plays, and that's what it's all about. I say the Broncos lose if they lose the turnover battle. I think it's pretty simple. This is a Broncos team that is not as good as the team they're going against, hence the 10.5 point, underdog story here. And I think that their only real chance is if they win the turnover battle and get some quote-unquote cheap points, off a short field or something, or take points off the board because the Vikings are driving and the Broncos take it away. But I think they have to win the turnover battle in this game.
Yep.
So MVP if the Broncos win.
I'm going to go whoever the number 2 wide receiver is in the game.
Wow. Really?
I am. I'm going to go bold here. I just think, like I said, the Vikings are going to load up to stop the run game. And I think Courtland Sutton's going to have a few plays, but I also think that they're going to pretty much say anybody but the run game and Courtland Sutton. So they're going to give all these other guys one-on-one opportunities. Fred Brown, Juwan Winfrey, Tim Patrick, Deontay Spencer. And I think this could be one of those games. Last week, Deontay Spencer was so close to having a big play.
Yeah.
This could be that game where he really gets that 70-yard touchdown for the Broncos. I could see that. And so if the Broncos can have another guy that can produce at least a couple big plays for him, I think they really stand a pretty good chance. And so for me, I think that guy has to be the MVP.
I'm going to go with Phillip Lindsay. I think that if the Broncos go win this game, it's probably going to be protecting the passing game and the tackles and running the ball effectively. And, I'm not out on Royce Freeman, but he's turning into a Monte Ball-esque plotter. A little bit better in the pass game and, pass blocking. But still just, didn't love that pick when it happened. Thought he was limited. Thought he was probably not very much tread left on the tire. Just hasn't looked explosive. Slow to the hole. Not loving his running. So I'm going to go with Phillip Lindsay here. If the Broncos win, I think it's on his legs. So the GOAT, the guy everybody's blaming if the Broncos lose.
So I'm going to go the middle linebackers, Alexander Johnson and Todd Davis. I'll go 2 here. Just because, they are going to be tasked with having to slow down Dalvin Cook and especially beating him to those edges, making sure that he doesn't get those big plays. And so I feel like if those two can't contain those big plays, Broncos are going to get embarrassed in this one.
I'm going to go Chris Harris Jr. The passing attack, especially the wide receivers, it's going to be Stephon Diggs. And if the Broncos can stop Stephon Diggs, the Vikings are going to find a hard time moving the ball explosively through the air. But Chris Harris Jr. has been somewhat struggling this season. Despite what he said, the tape, the statistics, Broncos have struggled covering wide receiver ones this year. They're actually one of the bottom third of teams against opposing teams' wide receiver ones, according to Sports Info Solutions. And guess who's covering the number ones? It's been Chris Harris Jr. for the most part. So with the Vikings only having a true one really viable wide receiver out there in Diggs, if they lose, I think Chris Harris Jr. probably didn't pull his weight. So I love Chris Harris Jr., but maybe the Broncos were wise not to invest in. We still got to see these final 9 games, but he's not playing like what they're expecting, and he's not playing like a top 10 paid cornerback, at least not as a cornerback one. So the unsung hero, if the Broncos win, the guy that's doing the dirty work, won't get the love, but definitely deserves the credit if they pull off the dub.
Well, I'm going to go Mike Purcell. I mean, we already talked about that the interior has been improving, and still the majority of runs still go to the inside. I mean, every team's going to have that for the most part. And so if he can really contain that inside, I mean, that's exactly what the Packers did. And yes, Mike Purcell is not what the Packers have on that defensive line. But if he can really hold his own and slow them down, get them on some
unsung hero
zero or
team,
negative run plays,
Todd Davis,
really do the dirty work there, I think the Broncos can have some opportunities
rejoining
here.
This team, playing better, getting better and better in this defense. He's playing really good football right now. And him along with AJ have done a good job in the run game. And I would say that Davis is probably the most disciplined of the run defenders out there, and that's a big part of this zone defense. They're trying to get to that second level. Davis is really good at, getting to those lanes and beating / displacing offensive linemen getting to the second level. So I'm going to go with Todd Davis, and maybe that'll come back to bite me, because I do think that the tight ends are going to have to be a big part of this passing game for the Vikings. But I don't know. I got to ride with my guy. I feel like he's not my guy, so to speak, but with how people are so vehemently against Todd Davis, I feel like he is constantly an unsung hero. And in this scheme, playing better and better football, he's a guy that's going to have to be a difference maker if the Broncos are going to win. So, final score.
I'm going to go Vikings 21, Broncos 17.
Gosh darn it, that's close to the score that I was thinking. I'm going to go 1 point less on each side. Vikings 20, Broncos 16. So still hitting the under and a little bit more field goals in there, but the Broncos struggling in the red zone, especially. That's kind of been the case this year, and I don't think they're going to be able to rely on the explosive plays that we have seen or that we saw from them against the Browns. The Vikings are going to give up some yards, but they're going to flex a little bit in the red zone. So I think that's going to be a big thing. And the Broncos, too. I mean, really good red zone defense this year. So, all right, folks, we're going to take another break. Carl's actually going to get out of here. We got another segment coming up here for you with a buddy of mine who's a big Vikings fan and a buddy of his. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
And welcome back to the Building the Broncos podcast. Carl has left us, but I am back here, Nick Kendell, with two friends of mine, Kyle Hudson and Patrick Howell. Pat and I go way back. We are both two fraternity brothers, and I actually ran into him at homecoming. And I don't want to say that he begged to come on the podcast, but he might have begged a little bit to come on the podcast. So thank you guys very much for taking the time to come on here. And obviously both big Viking fans. Pat, I'll kick it off to you first. Tell me a little bit about your Vikings fandom and what you've been doing as of late as far as it pertains to the Minnesota Vikings.
Okay, yeah. I have been grew up in Minneapolis, lifelong fan. I've had a lot of heartbreak, obviously being a Vikings fan, but
yes.
Obviously a lot, but also some things to cheer about as well. And really, it's been great getting back in. Especially now, I live in Chicago, and I don't have obviously there's not a ton of Minnesotans here, but I've found my place at a really great Minnesota Vikings bar where I've met Kyle. And we are there every single Sunday cheering on the Vikes. And that has really changed my being able to watch this team. So, which has been exciting lately.
Yeah, and it doesn't hurt that the Michigan State football team has been trending downwards as well.
Exactly. That has helped me a little bit stay a little sane during this fall.
And Kyle, we've actually never met before, but Pat's like, I got to get my guy Kyle on with us. So tell the listeners a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. No, Pat and I, we go over a lot of Vikings games, a lot of things that happen on a week to week. I actually grew up in the Chicago area here, so I grew up in enemy territory, just, fell in love with the Vikings and being in the dome and having that high-flying offense with Dante Culpepper, Randy Moss, and whatnot. And the biggest thing for me was, sticking to my colors there. And as I went along, we found the Vikings bar, and that's where I actually was surprised that there's a few other people like me out there. So, unique situation, but love my Vikings and definitely share the heartbreak, but the excitement. This team seems to just really in just enough, but hasn't gotten us that big moment that we've all been waiting for. But hopefully soon.
Yeah, so what I do got to say, for me personally, I'm a very anti-Minnesota person this week because not only are my Denver Broncos going up against the Minnesota Vikings, but the Minnesota Gophers are coming to Iowa City to take on the Iowa Hawkeyes, and I have tickets, so
that could be a big game. That's got some giant implications right there. That's some huge implications.
I cannot wait, and a lot of NFL talent as well. So it's I'm going to be obviously doing my scouting while I watch the game and making sure I don't tailgate too hard before, but you never know until you're in the tailgate. So bringing it back to the Vikings-Broncos game now. Obviously, the Vikings are having a really good season so far. They're the number 6 team, according to Football Outsiders DVOA, and they're more than average in both the offensive and defensive side of the ball. So a really well-rounded team. And this Vikings team for the past few seasons, ever since Mike Zimmer has joined this team as the head coach, has been more of a defensive-centric team. But this season, Gary Kubiak's come over. He's brought his West Coast offense, that Shanahan West Coast offense. And, man, there has been a real turnaround in the Dome, or I guess not the Dome anymore, but up in Minneapolis with this offense. So I got to ask you, I guess we'll kick it off to Pat first. What have you noticed the biggest difference with the addition of Gary Kubiak and this new West Coast offense scheme, and what's been the biggest beneficiary of switching this scheme?
Really, I've seen a lot of, obviously we had our struggles at the beginning of the season with Kirk Cousins really finding his place on this team. I mean, that last year happened. But again, what I've really been able to see is having Dalvin Cook back has been huge for us. Giving Kirk a little bit more time, because teams really do not know how to handle Dalvin Cook, whether that's getting those 5-6 yards on first down has been huge. I mean, if you put Kirk Cousins 2 yards back and he's sitting at 2nd and 12, you're really getting worried. But when he's able to get those 5 or 6 yards right on first down has been huge, I think, right off the bat.
Yeah, and going to kick it off here to Kyle. What specifically with this scheme do you think has been such a beneficiary to Dalvin Cook? Is it just Dalvin Cook being healthy? Is it the zone, outside zone specifically? I know the Vikings have been really good outside the numbers. They're running the football, out wide. Or is it just this offensive line kind of finally starting to gel? I mean, you have 3 first-round picks there, Riley Reif, Pat Elflein, and rookie Garrett Bradbury. So what's the secret sauce here to this West Coast offense and the Kubiak offense doing so well? Because as you guys probably know, Denver's running a very similar scheme, and it just has not worked out the same so far.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Kubiak has been a big part of where this Vikings offense has really found its stride. Last year, we were one of the worst rushing offenses in the NFL. I want to say we ranked about 29th on several sources. And I think what Kubiak's style brings with those outside zone runs, those stretch plays, it forces those defensive linemen to stay in their gaps and stay contained. And, the biggest thing with Kirk Cousins and getting him going is the play action game. And when they're freezing up on those stretch plays because they need to stay in their gap, that allows a bigger and greater opportunity on play action. And Kirk Cousins has actually had a 127 quarterback rating on play action this season. And he's actually had a perfect QB rating rolling to his left. So, I say bringing that running attack with various outside zone runs and setting up the play action, I think, has really been the biggest part to make our offensive line look better, to make Kirk look better, and really mold the offense to his strengths there.
Yeah, it definitely has been a night and day difference for this Vikings team. I gotta admit to you guys, my sister, because of her boyfriend, is a big Packer fan. and I watch a decent amount of NFC North here, and living in Iowa City. But I think if I had to pick one team in the North, it would probably be the Vikings. I don't know, it's something about that purple, and also everybody. I know way too many Bears fans, and the Packers are always the lead dog, and who wants to cheer for the Lions? So probably the Vikings, the team that I'm rolling with there. But it does sound like keeping it with the offense here, Adam Thielen is trending towards being out this week. I'm not sure if it's been officially announced yet. Again, listeners, we're recording this on Thursday night, but how are you personally? How do you see the Vikings making up for the loss of Adam Thielen this week? I guess we'll kick it off to Pat here. How do you make up for Adam Thielen? I mean, I don't really love the depth of the pass weapons outside of these top two guys in Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen.
We've seen, especially, I think a big one in Dallas last week was Kyle Rudolph. I mean, Kyle Rudolph has been really on and off throughout the entire season, but really found a stride getting that ball in the touchdown. Or getting that ball in the end zone. I mean, obviously we have no problem driving that ball down the field, but when you have Kyle Rudolph there to get that ball in the end zone, we don't necessarily need the giant plays that Adam Thielen brings. I think our tight ends as a whole, Irv Smith, who's a rookie for us from Alabama, I think he has been a great pickup that I'm really excited to see more out of him. So, I mean, I know you can always say you have the Stephon Diggs of the world, but I think a big part is going to be relying on that tight end game.
Yeah, that's a great point. Kyle, I guess I'll kick it off to you. I specifically want to know about these rookies on the offense. I was a big Garrett Bradbury fan, even though apparently he does urinate himself, which is kind of not great for an under center offense for Kirk Cousins. Hopefully he has a sponsorship with Purell or something. But Bradbury and Irv Smith, I mean, that's really a shot in the arm to this offense. And typically, rookies, the first year, especially if you're not picking top 10, they don't tend to hit immediately. They're a little bit more, 2-3 years down the line. But it seems like Bradbury struggled early on. I mean, Kenny Clark, probably one of the best nose tackles in the football, had his way with him in the Green Bay game. But Bradbury's been playing really good football as of late.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, because Bradbury to start off the year really was a sore spot. And, it came to the point where, people are wondering, should we be sitting him, until he really finds his own and is more comfortable out there. And I think he had some more favorable matchups. And, I know it's going to be tough with the Denver interior defense today with, Shelby Harris and Mike Purcell, sorry. And so I think that's a matchup to watch, especially up the middle. But to go back real quickly, as it relates to what do you do with Adam Thielen out, I think it really started for us with the second half of the Kansas City game 2 weeks ago. We went into that game believing, Thielen's going to be available, work the game plan with Thielen there. And, once he was out, the offense looked a little lost. The safeties and the secondary said, okay, well, we're not going to let Diggs burn us, and make them throw underneath. Well, that is when, with not so strong of a wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3, you really had to utilize Dalvin Cook in the screen game. And so in particular against Dallas, there were 7 targets and 7 receptions thrown towards Dalvin Cook. He had 109 yards after contact, and a big component of that as well is not only to spread targets to Dalvin Cook in the passing game, but also to run a scheme that was more favorable for the Vikings matchup-wise. So we're going max protect a lot, multiple tight ends, even a fullback, which not many teams are running with a fullback anymore in today's NFL. And I think what that forces teams to do is roll their third linebacker out there, and teams just simply don't have the depth at that third linebacker position like they used to with the older style NFL offenses. And so I think that kind of helped expose Sean Lee actually on Dallas last Sunday. Getting Dalvin Cook in space and one-on-one with a linebacker, I mean, he's going to burn by him every time. So I think that's going to be important, not only just using the tight ends, but using the running back and then, using a couple of receivers if you need to.
Yeah, something that Denver historically, since they played that more Wade Phillips style defense, much more man-heavy, is that the linebackers have been consistently exposed in the pass game. And, I don't know if you guys recall George Kittle's record-breaking performance last year. I believe it was week 14. And that hasn't been the case so far this year. The Broncos, Vic Fangio coming over, more of a cover 4, cover 6 kind of scheme, much more zone heavy. And the Broncos don't have great athleticism at the linebacker position, but they have very smart, very instinctual, and very good run defending linebackers. So it's going to be interesting to see that kind of chess match going on there. Obviously, you guys know a thing or two about Vic Fangio as his time with the Bears there and creating one of the best defenses in football. So definitely going to be an interesting matchup there. Perhaps a little bit more on the boring side, at least on my end, when the Broncos offense takes the field. The Vikings defense, still one of the best units in the league. They're not as dominant as they have been in the past. Now, is that part because football is a complementary game? And when, the Vikings had, let's just call it a poorer offense recently, teams didn't have to play as much of a on their toes type of offense, having to press the envelope, so to speak. Now the Vikings offense is making plays. I mean, they're one of the most explosive offenses in football. This defense does appear to have taken a step back. Is there something on the field that's going on there that you think, or is it more just because of that complementary football aspect, Pat?
You've really seen that, obviously, in a lot of games. We have gotten lit up, and I'll be very honest in that fact, and by backup quarterbacks. I mean, that is one thing going into this game is I'm really excited to see how our defense works against Brandon Allen. Due to the fact is, look at what happened in the Kansas City game. I think there are some highlights in our defensive team right now. Eric Hendricks right now, probably the best linebacker in the NFL right now. Very, very aggressive, good on the rush, good on the pass rush as well. I really think a lot of it is going to be as well as seeing, how our cornerbacks will hold up. Obviously everyone's really been talking about Xavier Rhodes, our Pro Bowl cornerback, has had his struggles this year, and really seeing how a Trey Waynes and a Mike Hughes can really step up and play to that top 5 defense that the Vikings really have played at in the past couple of years.
Yeah, definitely. That's something that hasn't been so much the case this season, but that hasn't stopped the likes of Daniel Hunter and Everson Griffin getting after the quarterback. I believe they are the highest duo in terms of pressures in the NFL this season. Again, a little bit because of the Vikings playing with a lead and more pass attempts for the opponents, but still, Daniel Hunter, absolute stud, probably one of the most underrated edge rushers in football. It's either him or Chandler Jones for my money, and Everson Griffin, the constant stud. But I do wonder, looking at the roster here, Jalen Holmes, Hercules Mataafa, Shamar Stephen for that kind of 3 technique role. Have you guys been struggling as far as interior pressure this year? I mean, watching the Broncos all this season, Bradley Chubb, Von Miller, it's great when you have two great edge rushers, but I feel like in today's quick pass game, you need pocket pushers. You need guys who can win up the middle, especially against, good quarterbacks like Brady, Drew Brees, whatnot. Getting guys on the edge, they can sidestep those. They can manipulate the pocket there. But if you have pressure up the gut, that's, I feel like, the most important area to get pressure in today's game. Have you had a drop back there?
Yeah. To put it short, we miss Sheldon Richardson. Okay. Wish we had the cap to pay him, because missing that interior pass rush has really been a tough thing for the defense to overcome. When you look at Danielle Hunter and you look at Everson Griffin on the outside, a lot of teams are just letting them run to the outside, and you're having the quarterback step up. I mean, if you just go back to last Sunday alone against Dallas, Dak Prescott was taking advantage of that to full effect. So you really just try to force that pass rush to the outside, and that gives you quite a bit of room to step up there. I think as the Vikings defense as a whole, I was looking up their DVOA rankings on defense in particular, and how that broke out versus the pass and the run. And, the run is 5th. So, you're seeing a lot of success still with the Vikings run defense, but the pass is ranking 14th, and that continues to slip. I feel like on a week-to-week basis. And, to kind of go off of Pat's point there, Xavier Rhodes is certainly not the corner he was from a couple years ago. We started to see some regression last year.
I'm going to cut you off there. That's the point I exactly wanted to ask. What the heck's happened?
Part of it, he's been banged up here and there, but it really just seems like he's losing a step. And, I think losing that luxury of him being that lockdown corner, being that Jalen Ramsey where you don't even need to put a safety behind him 2 years ago, and so we were able to provide safety help on the other side of our cornerback position, where that would be like a Trey Waynes or a Mike Hughes. And we even had a more of an opportunity to blitz one of our safeties, knowing we didn't need to keep somebody over the top of Rhodes at all times. And so, now where we have to be a little bit more conservative about, having our safeties, especially like Harrison Smith, who likes to play in all three levels, you can't be as creative, and you have to sit him back there, and you can't really help out the pass rush. There are some quarterbacks as of late who really have targeted our cornerback position.
Yeah, that definitely is something that's concerning. And I don't know if you guys have been watching many Broncos games this year. Obviously, not the most exciting offense, but Courtland Sutton has arrived. Top 20 wide receiver so far this season. Some people did have some comps to him before the NFL draft of a Terrell Owens, not the most blazing guy, but his jumping ability, his size, and his incredible agility. I mean, he's 6'4", 210 pounds, and he's in the 95th percentile all time in his 3-cone, which is, it doesn't make sense for his body type, the way he can change direction like that. So that's going to be a battle that's going to be really interesting to watch. But, we're already at about 20 minutes here, guys. So I'm going to ask you, just your overall, who's been the MVP of the Vikings this season? And Pat, I'm going to go to you first.
I'm going to be honest. I'm going to be a little bit biased here, but I'm going to say Kirk Cousins.
All right.
After a season like he had last year, where he had a lot of doubters, after the beginning of the season where he had a lot of doubters, to come back and to have the last 5 games he's had and had top passer rating, he's only throwing 3 touchdowns 3 interceptions against 18 touchdowns. And he's stepping up in the pocket. He's not taking sacks. I think ultimately he is our MVP just for the confidence that he's really stepped up and gotten over the last 6 to 7 games.
Yeah, and I do want to say there's obviously, there's some other guys here that might be more flashy or whatnot, but you guys know probably as well as anybody, and the Broncos are finding it out in the post-Manning era, if you don't have that quarterback, you're not doing jack squat. So having Kirk Cousins playing at that level elevates everybody and makes it a competent team. Hats off to Gary Kubiak too, building a scheme that's really highlighting what Cousins did well at Washington, under Jay Gruden as well, and obviously under Sean McVay there. So a lot of consistency there between the two and the heavy play action. But that's a good pick. He's playing at a really high level. And Kyle, I'll kick it to you. Your MVP so far this season.
Yeah, I just think you got to go Dalvin Cook. I mean, what he's doing, not just running the ball. He obviously fits well on those stretch plays, those pitch plays, those outside handoffs. He's beating people. But to really be that vital option in the passing game that we need to balance things out when you have Thielen go down or you don't have the depth you'd like at wide receiver. I really think he makes this offense tick. I think he makes the Kubiak system work for us, and I think it's been very helpful to Cousins, having that rushing attack that he just simply didn't have last year.
Alrighty, and kind of going to tie this one into two since we're getting a little bit long here. The guy, not only your GOAT, not the greatest of all time GOAT, but the guy who's been the most disappointing, but also the dude who you are worried the most, not coming through this week and that the Broncos might exploit. And we'll go Kyle first this time.
I still got to be worried about the cornerback position. I know we mentioned the Sutton matchup, and I don't know what corner will be on him, whether that is Rhodes or whatnot. But I think that's going to be the greatest opportunity to continue to attack the corners. And if we start having to drop back too many people in the secondary and pass coverage, I think then that might allow the Broncos to utilize their strong running game and maybe loosen up what has been a great rushing defense just because of, not being able to send people and dropping too many people in coverage.
All right, Pat, same question for you.
And, I'm gonna be a little bit more broad on my answer with that, and I'm going to say our offensive line. I mean, I know the Broncos have lived and died over the last couple of years with Von Miller and how aggressive he is. And, the offensive line has had its struggles this year. So I really think them as a unit is really, I'm going to need to see a strong step up from them to really open up the game for the Vikes.
So, all right. Well, the Vikings are favored by 10.5 points, and the Broncos are road dogs. The Broncos have not done well historically in that early time slot on the road. Worse on the East Coast than the Central Time Zone, but still it's an issue. So, got to ask you both your predictions for the game. So, Pat first.
I really I see a 24-10 Vikings.
24-10 Vikings. All righty. And Kyle, how about yourself?
I'll go 27-20 Vikings. I think there'll be a little bit more scoring, but undefeated at home this year, 4-0. I do feel like the U.S. Bank home field advantage will play a big part in this, but I do think the Broncos keep it closer than people expect.
We're one of the last, I think, 3 teams that are still undefeated at home.
So, man, I gotta get my way up to that stadium. It looks absolutely beautiful. So, good place to take in a football game. And obviously, the Vikings are king in Minneapolis. Personally, I went 20-16 Vikings. I think it's going to be a more low-scoring affair. The over/under is 40.5. Broncos have Brandon Allen coming in. They did pretty well against the Browns last week, but I think it was more the offensive playmakers making plays. The Broncos actually do have some good, really fun, young, exciting offensive playmakers in Cortland Sutton, Noah Fant, and Phillip Lindsay, but I just don't think it's going to be enough. So, all right, well, thank you guys very much for coming on. It's always fun to talk to rival fans, and personally, I'm not the type to really talk much-ish, so to speak. I prefer actually more having the sit-down, intelligent talk because I'm a snob like that. So appreciate it, you guys, and thank you very much for taking the time and coming on. And hey, maybe we can do this for the Super Bowl. Yeah, right.
I'll take that.
That's the goal. That's the goal.
So, all right. Thank you guys very much for coming on, and we'll see you later. Well, that's going to wrap up today's episode of Building the Broncos, powered by Overtime Media. You can find Carl on Twitter, at Carl Dumler MHH, and myself at Nick Kendell MHH. Make sure you head over to Mile High Huddle, an affiliate of the Maven Coalition and Sports Illustrated. You can follow the Building the Broncos podcast and all our other great audio content by subscribing to the Huddle Up podcast wherever you listen to your shows. You can follow us on Twitter, at Mile High Huddle and at BTB Football Pod. For Carl, I'm Nick, wrapping up another episode of the Building the Broncos podcast. We hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll see you soon. Go Broncos.
You've been listening to Building the Broncos. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com to keep the conversation going.